Hello, thanks for joining this Embarcadero DBA and Developer Skill Sprint. In this skill sprint, I'll discuss some tips and tricks when working with Rapid SQL, our cross-platform database development tool. And in this skill sprint, we'll be focused strictly on Rapid SQL. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll pull up Rapid SQL. We'll see that I am connected to a SQL Server data source. In my presentation today, I'll be talking very general terms of features and functionality. So the database that I'm connected to has no bearing on what I'm going to show today. I'm strictly focusing on this data source as it's one of my VMs that's on my machine. So I've got it running, so we're just going to go with it. So let's go ahead and get started with a few of the things I want to talk about at a high level. First, we're here with the data source Navigator. So again, as we look at some of the areas of focus here, I want to pay attention to the drop-down options. This is my go-to where I like to start all of my new training when I'm working with folks that are new to Rapid SQL. I want to point out this drop-down arrow here. So first, organized by object owner. This is a toggle between object owner and object type. Whichever one is selected is the one that's not showing up. So right now I am organizing by object type. Here I have the ability to show system objects, never always, or use the data source filter. We'll talk about filters here in a little bit. Show only my objects. So if I want to restrict and only show my objects, I have the ability to do that as well. That's a nice feature when you have a very large database and your data source has a lot of other tables. Maybe your dev environment looks a little bit like that. You can always then opt for just showing my objects. Full refresh is going to do just that, refresh the entire tree. Expand, the collapse, these are pretty straightforward. Retain view settings, that's an option to retain those, so when I come back into the tool, it'll restore exactly where I left off. I have that set to yes. If I click that, I toggle it, it will be no. And then lastly are my bookmarks. This is where I access my bookmark manager, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on in this skill sprint. So we talked about organizing by object owner or object type. We also have the ability to set that in options, and I'll talk more about the options here in a little bit as well. So let's go ahead and I've expanded the data source, right, in order to work with data sources, right, because ideally when we first starting out, we may have a blank screen, a blank Rapid SQL environment with no data sources, or we could be moving to a new machine. How do we get those data sources over? Easy way to do that is through our data source options here. Go to the Manage Data Sources, and at this dialog, now I have the ability to go ahead and extract data sources or import data sources. So in this dialog, I can select all of my data sources. I can export those to individual data source files, or I can export them to a shared data source management file. So one complete XML file that would contain all of my data source information. So if I want to back that up, restore it to a new machine, when I install Rapid SQL on my new machine, easily get all of my data sources over. If I'd like to share my data sources with a coworker, maybe somebody new to the team, I can do the same thing, export those, send them over. So to work with your data sources, to move them in and out of your Rapid SQL instance, this is the preferred method. I'm always going to point you to this. I use this whenever I have to stand up a new machine or a new VM for testing purposes. I'll export those data sources, and in a minute I'm back up and running. And just know that this information that you see here, right, will come over. Certainly no usernames or passwords are going to come over. But if you have a default user, if you have default schema, we'll bring that information over. So that is the Manage Data Sources. You also have the ability from within the data source menu to discover data sources. So when you select Discover Data Sources, Rapid SQL will go out and start looking. It will look for a SQL.ini file if you're a Sybase shop. It'll look for a TNS names file if you're an Oracle shop. It will do some net searching for SQL Server if you have those on. If you have the DB2 client and you've configured data sources there, we can pull that information back. So that's the approach that Rapid SQL is going to try and do when you opt for Discover Data Sources. So you usually press that, then it will present you with a list of those data sources, at which time you can go through and pick and choose which ones you'd like to be brought over. and have a data source created for you, or you can just select them all. So again, discover data sources is another easy way of just scanning the environment to bring your data sources back. A few other things to point out here is I am connected and I have it selected. I want to show properties. So at this point, if you're ever interested in understanding the properties of both the data source and the middleware, so here you're looking at SQL Server, we're getting my version information back, modes, read, write. My middleware, you're seeing that I'm using a SQL Server native client, right? And what specific version, and then what the file name, what the DLL we're using. So again, if you're ever questioning how you're connecting to the specific data source, go to data source menu option and then look for data source properties. So as I look through my data source here, let's go to the filters. I mentioned a little bit earlier about when looking at showing system objects or showing my objects to use the data source filter. Every data source has its own filters tab. Here, ignore system objects. We can select that on. To show only my objects, we can toggle that on. If I'd like to add a new filter, simply select filters, add filters here, and now I'm working within my data source. So if I wanted to create a new one here, maybe we want to say the schema equals, we can create it as DBO. Now we have a new filter, and I should have, right, new filter. I could rename that only. Press OK, and now we have my DBO only filter. So good to go there. So now if we navigate through, we'll see those objects with the DBO only. I'll toggle that back off, and we'll go back here to the filter tab again. Now this is what we refer to as our object filters. So as I selected DBO, I could come here, the schema equals DBO. I could also look at my database elements. So I can look here to see what elements of the database do I want this filter to apply to. So here by default, we're selecting all. So these are my filters pertaining to the specific data source. If I want to look at an overall environment, here are my node filters. So for example, for MS SQL, we can look for the databases. I can pick and choose. If a specific object type is not applicable to my environment, I can simply unselect it. So in this case, if asymmetric keys are not important, I can uncheck them here. If, let's see, extended procedures, I can, and what we'll notice then is when I go back to the Explorer, those objects will not show up in the tree. So I can customize how I'd like the Explorer tree to look. So we'll press OK there. And if I navigate through, here I'm looking at my databases. I can look into my little sample database here. We can look into my procedures node. Here we're going to pull back all of the procedures. Right? So let's say that I'm going to be working in this store procedure quite often. Right? Maybe over the next week or so, finishing up a project. I can create a bookmark. So here's where the bookmark manager comes into play. We'll create a bookmark here, and it's going to provide a name. I'm going to do just demo bookmark and broker client breakdown. So I've just named my bookmark. Now, start the day. I come in, I connect to the data source, and I'm connected. Quickly go to the bookmark manager, highlight my bookmarks, SQL Server, demo, bookmark. See, takes me right to the specific node in the Explorer, right, that I've created the bookmark for. So again, a real easy way of navigating through the Explorer to that specific object that I want to work on. Then if I step through here, you'll notice that when I select, let's say, tables, for example, I'm seeing my list of tables. Now, if I scroll up and pick AdventureWorks, a little bit more information there. If I look at the tables, we'll see that we have some under DBO, some under human resources, person, different schemas, and different owners. If I select, change this back to organized by object owner, now, as I look into AdventureWorks, now I have my owners. So there's my schemas. Now if I want to select DBO, then I can select my tables, and only those tables owned by DBO will appear. If I wanted to look under production, here are the production tables. Now, This is one way of doing it within Rapid SQL. And as you'll see, as you work more with Rapid, we normally provide multiple ways of accomplishing the same thing. So let's go back and keep this at organized by object type. By nature, that's the way I like to operate when I'm working within Rapid. If I look at my tables, right, we see my list of tables. Now 75, certainly not that big, right? But I do work with customers that have thousands. And where to begin as we start scrolling down through. The other method of viewing objects, the other method would be to look at the browse function. And here, browse, we can go to browse tables. And here are my tables. So let's take a look here. We can see the tables listed. We can drop the owners list down. And here we're selected as DBO. I can select all owners. And I quickly view all of the owners in every table or every object. So in this case, I can utilize the real-time filter and filter on the table name of person. So I'm bringing back every table name that has person in it, either at the beginning, somewhere, or somewhere in the table name. And this is applicable for all objects. So again, looking at this, then it's through the browse function, browse menu, and then pick the specific objects we want to browse for. And at this point, just as we could do it over on the left hand in the Data Source Navigator, I can right-click and get my full context menu. So I can see all of my commands that I have access to. So we'll close this. I want to take a step back. So if I'm here in my tables, if I scroll down and look at that same person table, and I right-click for the context, now you can see what I have here for my context menu. So at this point, I could pick and choose what objects or what commands I'd like to take. So if I were to maybe open this table, now we're presented with the table editor, and I can step through if I'd like to change, add a new field, right, add column. And let's name this Skill Sprint Demo column. And we'll bring it down, and you'll notice my list is specific to my database that I'm connected to. What would we like? Let's just do we'll make it easy, character with, we'll do 50. And so now we can specify other values if I like, but now I have the field added. So at this point, I could press Alter, and Rapid SQL will generate the script needed to alter the table. This is a very simple alter statement, right? And it creates it for me. I can, at this time, I can execute. I can pump it out into a larger SQL window. I could schedule it to run at a later time. In this case, I'm going to cancel it. The interesting thing here with Rapid SQL is that if I needed to put this column somewhere else in the list, I can maybe add it up after suffix. Now if I press my Alter button, I get a much different script, because Rapid SQL knows that you just can't simply add that column in the middle of a table. We have to perform a lot more operations. We refer to this as an extended alter. So we have this list. You're going to see me scrolling through. I'm dropping some of the dependencies, right? Going through all the indexes. I'm altering the table. Right now, I've renamed the table to a backup copy. I've created my new table with that SS demo column right there, Skill Sprint demo column. And now I'm inserting into the new table with the contents from the backup table. And then I continue back through, re-adding and recreating all of those scripts. So again, that's 890 lines of code in a matter of just pressing an Alter button. So we'll close out of there. And so obviously the rest you're going to see properties. We get to see this information, indexes, any indexes that have been created for this objects, any constraints. And lastly is the DDL view. And we're seeing the DDL view here. If you quickly want to get it, there's our extract button here. We can pull that out. I'm going to select no to save those changes. and now I have the extract in a brand new SQL window. So as I mentioned before, multiple ways to do it. You saw when I was in the editor, I selected extract. I'm also able to go over here, right click, and select extract here. So I want to quickly hop over a few things to look at here. Under view, script library, right? At one point, it was, over the life of Rapid SQL, was referred to as favorites. It's referred to as script library now. And we deliver the product with several examples for each database platform. Now here, you can see that I have my own favorites. And as I look here, if I want to open up this, I can double click and we open up into a new MySQL window. If, for example, I've saved just a snippet of a query or just maybe a complex where clause and I want to bring that in, right, I can always just drag it over and drop it in my iSQL window, and it will place that right where it needs to go. So again, this is the script library. So view and then script library. And to add a new one, very simple, we'll put it under demo favorites. Right click, we'll put new item. We'll give it a name, and then now all we're going to simply do is point to a file. It can be on your own machine. It can be on a network share. It's simply a redirection to that. Now, I have a lot of customers that will use this facility in order to point to common library of scripts, and they easily can do that then using the script library. So if I back up out of here and pull in another, maybe I think I have one on my desktop here. Yeah, we can look at that command there. And now any hotkeys, there's my file type, and there is my new skill sprint, my physical favorites. So again, that is the script library. The other area that I'd like to talk and make sure folks understand are the options. I know it gets boring, but some of the things we can show in here. We talked about data source, and traditionally we are a Windows registry data source catalog. You have the option, though, of going to a file-based data source catalog. That's what I'm using now, so it stores them on the file system as an XML format. Network shared. If you want to point to a common folder for your data sources, you can do that. Just note that though you can add new data sources each time you start Rapid, it's going to flush all of your current data sources and reload with the contents of this file that's depicted here in this parameter, in this setting. So you will lose any net new data sources you've created unless you can get over and add them to this network data source catalog. The general, if we look through here, for instance, I'm on SQL Server. We have a couple here to specify. Again, version control. Rapid SQL integrates with version control. Here you can see I'm using Visual Source Safe. It allows me to prompt through. Here are the different plugins that I have. So I have Source Safe as well as TFS on my system, so I can do that here as well. Let's see what my connection. If I look again at SQL Server, you'll see that I have the ability to use quoted identifiers. I can use native client selection. So if I have multiple clients, again, working with Oracle, right, we have the ability to have different Oracle homes to select. We can do different clients. We can point to a common tnsnames.ora file. We can depict that here as well. So again, some nice options here. So on the Explorer, the organization here, we can set that as a default. So I mentioned about organizing by object owner or object type. You can see my default is object type. On the others, we're showing system objects and my objects. So again, we've got using the data source filter. So I'm pretty adamant about always wanting to use the data source filter. If that's not important, override it here in your options, and each time you start up Rapid SQL, it will default to that. Looking at the iSQL, really quick, one area that I do want to point out, and besides the errors, right, we can turn this on or off. The code assist. So here is in my code assist area, I can enable code complete. So when I start writing queries, I can get that pop-up of the columns. Code validation, you'll see that I have enabled real-time syntax checking. It's going to come back. It's going to ignore it. It's going to continue to process, but it's going to prompt me and let me know that I have an error. I can do any of the, ignore it. I can throw up a warning or an error. In the DB action menu, oftentimes we've had customers that were writing and working with queries, or maybe they were handed a query to troubleshoot, and they're stuck. Well, they're not stuck. They know the contents of the query, right? They know the structure. They know the tables that are being referenced. But if they want to go back through and take a look at the table, look at potentially the structure of the table, maybe more importantly, look at the indexes that are related, they'd have to hop over to the Explorer and the data source navigator, navigate through there to find a specific table. Using the DB actions, and I'll highlight this in a little bit, it provides us shortcuts to get directly to the objects. And that's the DB action menu, and then any metadata. And this applies to our integrations with our other products in the Embarcadero family, specifically ER Studio Team Server. And then lastly, the results. So here you'll see I'm going to use a single window attached to the editor. We could use multiple windows. So each time I run a query, a different iteration of a query, it's going to spawn a new result window. So we can continue to work there. Here's our text size. Default row count is 0. I often get asked questions, can we control the row count and specify, limit the number of rows returning? You can do that right here. So, and then last, the format. So if you want to specify enable date-time formats, we can do that as well. Let's go ahead and press OK. Let's go. Then I'm going to open up a new iSQL window. You'll notice that I pressed the clipboard here, the piece of paper. New, by default, it's going to get us an SQL. We can do a new project. We can do a new DDL editor, or maybe just a plain text file. So here I'm working. I'm going to go ahead and connect back and select the data source, the database under my data source to my sample GIM. So I'm going to, as you'll notice here, I've typed SEL. I hit spacebar. Select star from is replaced. That's an auto replace function. You'll find that in Tools, Code Workbench, and auto replace. SEL is delivered with the product. So select star from will fully qualify DBO dot. Now I get my list of tables. So let's go with the first table, and we'll name it B1. And then we're going to do the same for client, and that's C1. Now we'll start getting the where clause where B1 dot, and you'll notice I'm presented with the list. The broker ID equals C1 dot. We'll get the broker ID from there as well. Right? And let's do one where the last name, I need them where the last name is not null. Right? So I'm going to is not, and you'll notice right now, you'll notice the little red box in the margin. An unexpected token NU was found expecting null. Right? So I'll continue to type, and as soon as I get the word correct, it's going to replace it, and the errors will disappear. So I'm good there. Now the other one that I like that we have in the product is COU. That's select count from. So again, I'll use the same. This time I'm going to use client transaction, right? And then last, we'll do another count, and we'll get that one from. What I want to do here is you'll notice that as I'm typing, I have my list. So if I want to hop out of the GIM database, I see the list here. So I'm going to go over to the AdventureWorks, and we'll alias that, and I'm going to select Human Resources, and then here's my list. So now I have my 3 queries. So using Rapid SQL, I'll hit execute, and you'll notice that here's my first query that's run. So I've scrolling down through here. We know at the end because my 2 other queries were just counts. So there's my first count, client transaction, and here's my second from the AdventureWorks table. You'll notice I'm reusing the same results window. If I go back to the query, if I just wanted to execute a single, we've always had the ability to highlight. Now if you click anywhere in the statement, we can execute statement. And there it parses to the end, comes back to the beginning of the query, and then executes. Now I mentioned about the DB Actions menu. So if I highlight that table and right-click, from the context menu you'll see my list. Now what you're missing is the DB Actions menu, and in order to invoke that, we'll hold down the Control key. Right, so if you get anything else out of today, hold down the Control key, right-click, and now we have our DB Actions menu. So from here then, if I'm interested in the client transaction table, I can open it up. I can do an extract of the table right from here. I can import data from the file. I can build another query using the query builder from here. In this case, I'm going to open it. So it takes me right to that object editor. In this case, I could take a look. Are there any indexes tied to this table? And I see that. So again, really quick using the DB Actions menu. Again, that's holding down the Control key, right-click, and then you're presented with the DB Actions. A few other things that I wanted to talk about today in the skill sprint. Let's select the store, and we're going to do a select star from. And let's modify that a bit. And now, while I'm looking here, I want to get a smaller list of stores. So in this case, I'm going to double-click this row, and I can sort right from within the results. So I see 292. I'm going to have a business entity less than 300. So we'll alias, and you don't have to alias. That's out of habit. Less than 300. We'll execute that. So now I have my results that I want. So there's a couple ways of bringing data back. One method that I know a lot of customers like is the ability to generate insert statements right from within the results. And this is only applicable if you're using a single table. So here, I can highlight those four, right-click, generate insert statements from here. If I select that, the insert statement are generated. At this point, I could move it over because it's so easy to do in Rapid. I could drop this down, select another data source, pick another AdventureWorks environment, maybe it doesn't have any data at all, and run this script and put it right in there. The other option that we have is I could take this information, right-click, Save As. I'm going to save it as a tab delimited, and I'll put it right on my desktop. We'll save that. Now, that is from my store table. So here, I'm going to right-click, and you'll notice, I want to go over to here, import data. And I could find that here, import data from file. There you go. We'll put import data from file. We'll point to the file that we need. It was on the desktop. It was my storage tab data. We'll press OK. My schema, sales, table, store, it knows this information because that's what I have selected. Press next. It's tab delimited. First row contains field names. Now we see that we have the information right there. Now, I'm going to take a step back. What if our first row didn't contain field names? We'll press next, and here is where I get to pick and choose. So your file does not have to be in the same order of fields that are in your table. You can pick and choose. So here, and what you see here are red equals mandatory, and anything that's blue is already assigned. Anything that's black are optional. They can be null. So if you don't have them, no problems. But if it's red, you need to have a value there in order to insert into this table. So I could pick business ID. Here is my name. And again, I'm sort of cheating because I see everything here. I'm going to take a step back, and we'll check this field name. Now I have my rows here ready to go. When the Finish button is enabled, that means you've got a situation where the insert statements are going to execute successfully against this table. So when I press Finish, what appears, you'll notice there, prompting me with the information about a LOB, large object. So here you'll see the insert statements. We don't automatically insert for you. It was pretty clear from our end users, when we vetted this feature, that they wanted to see insert statements. They didn't want us to automatically put it in there. This way they can save it, they can run it against this instance, they could connect to another data source and run that as well. So lots of options to choose from within the import data. So I'll go ahead and close that. Now, I'm going to wrap up here in a little bit, but I want to talk about two things left. First, view Workspace. I don't know how many people still use Workspaces. Very popular item, right? But lately I haven't heard many people using it. So by default, Rapid SQL provides 3 different workspaces to use from. And you'll see this down here, Workspace 1, right? If I select this, I can choose one of 3 workspaces. So I'll give you a little background and use case on why I do this. So Workspace 1, I'm focused right now with my AdventureWorks on my local SQL server. Workspace 2 will set the current. You'll notice that I have nothing here. So my Workspace 2, though, that's where I'm going to spend time in my QA environment. Right? So let's open up a new iSQL window. And we'll get an investment type query here. So now we're good. So we have my queries running in my Workspace 2, as it shows in the lower left. If I want to go back to my other workspace, set Workspace 1 as the current, you'll notice all of my tabs are still there. So I'm still working back in my AdventureWorks workspace. Hop back over, maybe do some more things in my QA workspace. Now I'm back. Oh, I didn't save it. I needed to save it. That's why it's not showing up. Let's hop back to my first one, and there we go. I can step through there. So Workspaces was number 1. And the last thing I want to show today, and I usually show this starting off, but I wanted to make sure we didn't miss it. You'll notice that my tabs are highlighted in red. I have red highlighting background for the data source name, as well as there's a red highlight square around the name. I do that by data source categories. So when I edit or create a new data source, the last page is called data source group. This is where what group I assign it to. And then lastly, we have the ability to specify category. So by default, the product is delivered with development, production, test, QA. I've added a few of these. I need to go through there and clean them up. But again, if it's a development environment, I can select that. And if I would connect to that, you'd see my tabs then are in blue. And so again, real easy way. And so that helps us as we start working through and we start switching back and forth between development and testing to make sure that the objects are in sync. We can keep those separate by looking at the colors. You can also keep those separate, right? By if we select that, pick the data source. The other thing, and this is my bonus tip of the skill sprint, is the lock and unlock connection. So if you ever want to lock the connection to a data source and never risk having this query run against in another environment, accidentally truncating the table in test, and the next thing you know, you realize you run it against the production environment. And you can stop that by locking the query. So again, as I lock the query window, you'll see that it's by selecting the option, it will not respond to data source change events. So no matter what you do, you're always going to be locked. In my case, I'm going to be locked this specific data source. So that's the lock connection. So between the lock connection and data source categories, just putting a color category on it, and we've made. Hopefully, you're feeling a little bit more secure when you're hopping back and forth between environments, that you know with confidence that you're going to be executing the query or the statements against the environments that you truly intend to do that. And on that, I'm going to wrap up today's DBA and Developer Skill Sprint, talking about Rapid SQL's tips and tricks. Now, if you have any questions, there may be a few in the question manager. I'll go ahead and look at that. Let's see. There's one question about the data sources that we connect to, the platforms. And certainly I was using SQL Server, but Oracle, Sybase ASE, Sybase IQ, DB2 LUW, both UDB and on the mainframe. We connect a Postgres, Teradata, and some generic ones via JDBC or ODBC, right? So lots of different options for you to connect to. And a question about debugging, yes, we do have integrated debuggers. I didn't get to it today, but we have it for SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, and Sybase ASE currently. Another question was concerning oh, this is a great question. I'll get back to the other one about non-SQL databases like Mongo. Currently, we don't have native support for Mongo. If there are JDBC or ODBC drivers out there, you certainly can connect via those drivers. And it would be as simple as, you know, for instance, I have a generic servers tab, register, and here you would pick generic ODBC driver, press next, and then here's where you would define. So you could create that new ODBC driver right from within the ODBC administrator and connect that way. But we've got Mongo's been on our roadmap, so I think product management might have something up their sleeve for Mongo, because we've certainly heard more and more of our customers going to that platform. And the other question was about integration with version control. Certainly, I showed Visual SourceSafe and Team Foundation. We also support others. The key there is they need to be SCCI compliant. So some of those vendors are SCCI compliant out of the box. Others, they have wrappers that they can wrap it up so it appears to our tool as being SCCI compliant, and it will handle all the communication in between. Right, on that covered the questions that were in the question manager. I appreciate everyone joining today, and this will certainly be available for a playback. I also encourage you to continue to monitor Embarcadero.com. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up. We're just getting ready to commence in a beta program for this next release of Rapid SQL that will be coming out in September. So certainly bookmark Embarcadero.com and visit often, and you'll get to see some very exciting product information from our product management and development team. So on that, I'd like to thank you for joining today. Have a great day.